Hello, everyone, and welcome to Archaeoviking. Today, I felt it was again time to present some more examples of what I call early colonial debacles that disprove the myth of inherent European superiority. And I say that because far too often, especially in countries like America and in European countries, in our modern minds, we tend to think of European empires such as the British Empire, the Spanish Empire, the French Empire, etc., as sort of the epitomes of both empire and civilization and modernization. However, as what I call these events uh, suggests, this was not always cut and dry, nor was it always clear that the European empires would come out on top. In fact, many times, uh, if not for a couple of minor details, it looked like, in fact, the European powers were going to fail. Which brings me to the subject of this video here, which is titled Cambodia Triumphant, the story of how Cambodia defeated the Spanish and Dutch empires in the early colonial era. So, most of us in our modern world tend to, if we hear the name Cambodia, if you know what the country Cambodia is. Now, unfortunately, not everyone knows about the country or has heard of the country Cambodia, but those of us who know what the country Cambodia is tend to think of it in its modern form, which is this relatively, I don't want to say incredibly small, but relatively small country in Southeast Asia, sandwiched between the countries of Vietnam and Thailand, and underneath the country of Laos. However, as I always like to point out, our modern preconceived notions of how countries exist as they are today are usually far from the whole truth. So, before we can look at the conflicts that happened between Cambodia and the European empires of Spain and Holland or the Netherlands, depending on what you want to call the Dutch Empire, we have to look at Southeast Asia before and or right up until European contact. So, prior to European contact, much of Southeast Asia was from around 800-ish CE up until around 1400 CE, much of Southeast Asia was controlled by a very powerful empire known as the Khmer Empire, which controlled most of the countries that we now know of as Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, or at least most of the southern half of Vietnam, and a little bit of parts of Myanmar and other countries. And it was a very powerful empire that was the regional superpower of Southeast Asia during that time period. And I don't know if you can see it behind me, but they are responsible for the for the construction of Angkor Wat, which was a very well-built city, built as the primary capital of the Khmer Empire. However, by the latter half of the Ming Dynasty, the Khmer Empire began to split apart due to in a great amount of internal strife, probably helped along by intense climate change, including drought, as well as perhaps even some outbreaks of plague, whether they be the bubonic plague or other diseases such as, say, and I'm just spitballing here, like such as, say, tuberculosis or malaria or what have you. Bubonic plague is usually the one that's mentioned most, but there could be any number of diseases that could have been broken out. But this combination of internal strife, climate change, and outbreaks of disease eventually led the Khmer Empire to break up into multiple other kingdoms, including, of course, Cambodia itself, but also kingdoms such as the Lanjong Kingdom of modern-day Laos and Myanmar, uh, and the Ayutthaya Kingdom, apologies for possibly butchering that, of modern-day Thailand, and the Dai Viet and Champa kingdoms of modern-day Vietnam. Oh, and the Moc dynasty. Again, apologies if I butchered that first name. And so that brings us to Cambodia. So during the early years of Cambodia, both before and right up until contact with Europeans, the Cambodian military probably looked very similar to a few different militaries of the time. It probably looked very similar to its predecessor military, the Khmer Empire's military that you can see here in this mural, as well as, considering they both split off from the same predecessor empire, the Cambodian army probably looked very similar to the Ayutthaya military that you see here, meaning they probably made great use of war elephants in warfare, like seen in this battle that the Ayutthaya kingdom fought. They also made use of cavalry that you can see here, as well as very probably predominantly on land used infantry. Both of these are from the Ayutthaya kingdom. Now, you might be wondering, why am I showing the Ayutthaya kingdom's military rather than the Cambodian kingdom's military? That's because, try as I might, I was not able to find any pictorial examples of the Cambodian military during this time period, during the 1400s and 1500s. I looked through academic sources and art galleries, etc., etc., and was unable to find them. However, I was able to find examples of Ayutthaya, or Siamese, air quotes, military units. And again, considering that they were literally right next to each other and were descended from the same predecessor kingdom empire, the Khmer Empire, it's very probable that they had very similar military makeups and uniform designs. And they also made use of, both Cambodia and Ayutthaya made use of navies, as seen here. This is, in fact, a depiction of the Ayutthaya Navy pursuing a Chinese pirate who had been raiding along the coast. And you can also see in this picture one of the Ayutthaya sailors is using a musket. And that's because during this time, in fact, well before this time, the 1400s and 1500s, gunpowder weapons had already begun to diffuse out of China into South and Southeast Asia. In fact, you can see a good indication of that in this figure right here, talking about the various types of firearms that appear in Southeast Asian records, starting at least as far back as 1057 CE, going up at least until 1527 CE. With things like with terms like mibok and sanat, again, apologies for possibly butchering that, denoting guns, just generic guns, and things like not amruk, or just amruk, or prone, or nasin prone, etc., denoting things like cannons. So, as you can see, they made use of pretty much all types of firearms available at the time. And again, these are Ayutthaya soldiers, but this is, as you can see, the Ayutthaya military did, in fact, use gunpowder weapons. And again, this is probably, these gunpowder weapons and these uniform styles are probably very similar to how the Cambodian military utilized them, and how Cambodian soldiers who utilized firearms dressed. And as you can see here, they also utilized heavy artillery, probably very similar to, if not directly copied from, Chinese designs. Though it is also important to note that during this period of time, Southeast Asian kingdoms such as Cambodia, Daviet, and the Ayutthaya Kingdom also made use of various different mercenary groups. Many of them being Muslim in origin, such as meaning that they would probably look very similar to, say, Mughal Indian musketeers, or Safavid Persian musketeers, or Safavid Persian soldiers and Mughal soldiers, give or take. We also know that they made use of Chinese mercenaries, as well as Chinese imperial soldiers that would occasionally be sent to tributary states under the hegemony of Ming China, with Ming Chinese soldiers and Ming Chinese mercenaries looking generally like what you see here, and with this example of Ming Chinese infantry, as well as a Ming Chinese musketeer. They also made some use, depending on country, depending on the kingdom, made some use of what were known as Wako pirates, or Japanese pirates, though that's a little bit anachronistic. While there were certainly many Japanese components to these pirates, they were more often than not predominantly Chinese and Southeast Asian, of Chinese and Southeast Asian descent. But regardless of that, these were a significant player in the Southeast Asian and East China Sea political sphere. So, of course, it's not uncommon to see kingdoms such as Cambodia and even the Spanish Empire, and we'll get to that a little bit later. It's not uncommon to see those kingdoms utilize Wako Japanese pirates as mercenaries. Okay, so now that we have taken a look at the history of Southeast Asia before and right up until contact with Europeans, as well as the makeup of the militaries of the Southeast Asian kingdoms before and right up until contact with Europeans, it's now time to take a look at, well, exactly that, first contact with Europeans. So, the first European empire to really begin to make inroads into Southeast Asia was the Portuguese Empire, which first began exploring the Indian Ocean and the region of South and Southeast Asia around 1498 CE-ish, with the first explorer being Vasco da Gama. And eventually, after these initial explorations, the Portuguese began to set up trading posts and colonization efforts all throughout Southeast Asia and South Asia, of course, setting up several trading posts in Indian cities such as Mumbai and Calcutta, setting up trading posts in Malacca, which lies in present-day Myanmar, or Malaysia, as well as trading posts in Indonesia, Macau in China, and of course Nagasaki in Japan. And they began to take advantage of the lucrative trade that had always been present in the Indian Ocean, that before then had been mainly utilized by Southeast Asian kingdoms, as well as China and Japan. And the Portuguese Empire would not take long for the Portuguese Empire to be followed in suit by the Spanish Empire, who also began to fairly quickly in the 1500s set up trade posts and colonies in South and Southeast Asia, specifically in the Philippines. And then eventually, both of them would be followed by the Dutch East India Company, which was a Dutch corporation that held, at least in the 17th century, the 1600s, held a monopoly on the Indian Ocean trade, becoming incredibly wealthy from it, and having their own sort of pseudo-military, very similar to the British East India Company, whom we talked about going to war with India in the 1630s. And it's from the trade between the Southeast Asian kingdoms such as Cambodia and Ayutthaya and the European empires such as Spain, Portugal, and the Dutch East India Company that led the Cambodian kings to move their capital to the city of Longvik in 1516 in response to the wealth that they were receiving from these trade networks. It was a very lucrative trade with Europeans. However, despite the wealth that this mutually beneficial trade between Southeast Asian kingdoms such as Cambodia and European empires such as the Spanish Empire brought, eventually this trade and this tentative peace would be put at risk. And this would be thanks to the expansion of the Ayutthaya kingdom during the 1590s. Specifically, this event happened when the king of the Ayutthaya kingdom at the time, Naresuan, apologies if I butchered that, invaded Cambodia in 1591, deposed King Satha I of Cambodia, who then was forced to flee the capital and seek foreign aid, with this war lasting from roughly 1591 to 1594 CE. And here is Naresuan, again, apologies for possibly butchering that, over here on the left, and then here is his Ayutthayan army marching into the capital of the Cambodian capital of Longvik. So, in response to losing his throne, Satha requests foreign aid from a variety of figures before finally being answered by Philip II of Spain, who proceeded to send Luis Perez das Marianas to invade and retake Cambodia at the request of Satha I. As always, apologies for possibly butchering that. Now, it should be noted that this was not necessarily out of the kindness of their hearts. They did have, the Spanish Empire, Philip and Luis, did have ulterior motives in mind. Specifically, they wanted to convert Cambodia to Christianity, specifically Catholicism. And so, upon accepting that the request for help from Satha I, Louise began to gather up an army of a few thousand soldiers consisting of Spanish conquistadors as well as Waco pirates. Again, remember, Waco pirates were often used as mercenaries by various different kingdoms in Southeast Asia. And it should be important to note that this army, specifically the conquistadors, was a highly trained army. During this point in time, the primary military formation of the Spanish army was what is known as a tercio, which was generally made up of of a mix of pikemen and musketeers, with pikemen generally being in the center and surrounded by musketeers. Sometimes this whole block would be nothing but pikemen, and the musketeers would be on the four corners. In fact, they would always be on the four corners, but sometimes the musketeers would be surrounding the pikemen in the center. It just depends on the commander and such. But either way, this is an incredibly formidable formation that allowed the Spanish to remain one of the most powerful militaries in the world at the time. So, with this highly trained army of Spanish tercios or conquistadors, as well as the Waco mercenary pirates, and to be fair, some loyalist Cambodian forces who fought on the side of Satho I, the Spanish were able to invade Cambodia and gain a victory over the Cambodian navy, as seen here and here. And they were also able to achieve a initial victory, at least, over a combined army of Cambodian and Chinese mercenaries. This is generally what the Chinese mercenaries would have looked like. However, despite the allied Spanish, Cambodian loyalist, and Waco pirate forces winning the battle, this was not an easily fought battle, and they suffered heavy casualties, and so as a result of those heavy casualties, the Spanish forces withdrew from Cambodia. However, Spain would not be gone forever. They would, in fact, seek further aid from other countries, including the Kingdom of Longzhong and modern-day Laos, and they would eventually invade Cambodia again in 1597 CE at the request of Satho I's son, Barom Reachea II. Apologies if I butchered that. And with these forces, they would be able to retake the Cambodian capital, here the tercios, of Long Vec, and retake Cambodia itself. And due to their victory, and thanks for their helping the Satho I's family regain control of Cambodia, Spain was granted the rights to control 2 provinces along the Mekong River. However, much of the Cambodian military would not be pleased by this, and so in 1599, the anti-Spanish Cambodian admiral Laksamana would ambush the Spanish army, massacre it, and force Spain to withdraw permanently. And here is again a picture of how an ambush like that might have looked. And with that, Cambodia would permanently force out the Spanish Empire from Southeast Asia, and would permanently end Spanish plans to or Spanish hopes to convert Cambodia to Christianity. But it doesn't stop there. This would not be the last time that Cambodia ousted and defeated a powerful European empire. And they would do it again around 44 years later to the Dutch East India Company in the Cambodian-Dutch War. And all of this would happen during the reign of Ramathipati I, apologies for possibly butchering that, who would usurp and assassinate the current Cambodian king. Yes, I know this is a picture of a European king being assassinated. I was not able to find any pictorial examples of a Cambodian king being assassinated during the 1500s. Bear with me. And then he would convert from Buddhism to Islam, which was one of the major religions of Southeast Asia, was and still is one of the major religions in Southeast Asia alongside Hinduism and Buddhism. And then upon taking the throne and converting to Islam, Ramathapati I would declare war on the Dutch East India Company. With the war lasting around a year and ending in the Cambodian victory and the massacre of Dutch East India Company workers and soldiers and citizens at the Battle of Phnom Penh, as seen here. This is a Dutch map, or a British map, I forget exactly which, of the Battle of Phnom Penh. So, with their defeat, much like the Spanish Empire, the Dutch East India Company would be permanently forced out of Southeast Asia. And in fact, due to their defeat of the Spanish Empire and the Dutch East India Company, Cambodia remained relatively free of European control for around 200 years. However, as most historians and students of history know, this would eventually change with the coming of the French Empire, who, through the course of the 1860s and 80s, would conquer most of Southeast Asia and dub it French Indochina. Though, while this happened, it's important to note this conquest event by the French happened 200 years after Cambodia defeated the Spanish and Dutch empires, or the Spanish Empire and the Dutch East India Company specifically, which goes to show that it was never a foregone conclusion that European superpowers, that European imperial powers, would be the ones that would come out on top. After all, after all, European imperial powers were defeated not once, but twice by the Kingdom of Cambodia. But unfortunately, the third time was the charm. Okay, so with that, there is the end of that video. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see me cover any of the nations, or whether it be the Khmer Empire or the Spanish Empire, or what have you, in greater detail in the future, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I hope you all have a good day.